with a piercing razor-like focus, which is, of course, Russia's war in Ukraine. The war between Israel and Iran distracted America, distracted you, the media, from the Ukraine war. And that is now the war that has to be focused on. And if Trump can miraculously come up with a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, now let's see him turn his attention properly to what's been going on in Ukraine.
Well, I get that, and we'll come to that in a moment. But just to dwell on the comparison maybe for a moment, clearly this came about after the US flexed its muscles and showed its strength. That is vanishingly unlikely as it relates to Russia, Ukraine. Is that necessary in conflicts like this to bring about peace?
I think you make a really important point. Exactly that. And if the war, the ceasefires come about because America got involved, let's see that apply in the war between Ukraine and Russia, Russia's war in Ukraine. Why? The only thing that is going to lead to a lasting ceasefire in Ukraine is when Russia recognizes Zelensky as president, Ukraine as a country, and the Ukrainian constitution. That is only going to happen when Russia is forced to do so. It's not going to do so voluntarily. And the only way that's going to happen is when Russia faces defeat on the battlefield. So therefore, muscle is needed to make that happen. And that means muscle needed to support Ukraine to achieve that.
But muscle's not going to come from the US in that war.
Or maybe the US can learn the lessons of what it's just achieved between Iran and Israel and apply it in Ukraine.
We shall see about that. Let's just dwell one more time on what the US did in Iran over the weekend. Were you wowed by the precision and the might that the US deployed? And bring it back to what we're discussing now. How far away are the rest of NATO from being able to do anything of that ilk?
I'm not going to be wowed until I see the precise battle damage assessments. We don't know yet if this nuclear program has been terminated conclusively. As far as NATO is concerned, there's an awful long way to go before NATO is truly combat ready. We're going to see the summit coming up today and tomorrow. We'll see what that leads to. But there's a long way to go before NATO is ready to face and ready properly to deter the sort of Russian attack on NATO that President Zelensky was talking about in his interview with Mark Austin.
Which, let's expand on that a little bit. You know, he said within 3 years, President Putin might test NATO's alliance, might invade a NATO country. Is that him being over the top, or is that realistic in your eyes?
That's entirely realistic. I've been saying that for 10 years, that Russia is a threat to NATO and Russia could test NATO. And when Russia, you want to look at it from the enemy's perspective. Putin will be looking at NATO. He will see a NATO divided by Trump and the American statement at the Munich Security Conference that America will no longer underwrite European security. He will be asking questions. What impact does that have on Article 5? For the first time in 76 years, there is now no certainty that the American president will come to the aid of a NATO member if attacked. That is exactly what Putin wants. Trump has given Putin 2 of his most cherished foreign policy objectives. He's cast credibility cast doubt on the credibility of NATO's Article 5, and he's cast doubt on America's commitment to Europe. Now, in that case, what does Putin think? NATO could well be a busted flush. I may well have a go at one of the Baltic states just to test NATO. Will NATO really respond properly? So I think we're in a very dangerous place, and President Zelensky is absolutely right to highlight the threat.
What do you make of these pledges by European members of NATO to hit 5% of national security spending? But I guess the key point is 3.5% of core defence spending by 2035. Are you warmed, impressed by that?
Again, forgive me for being cynical. 2014 NATO Summit. All NATO members promised to reach 2% of GDP spent on defence within 10 years. Most NATO members have only just done that. 5% by 2035 is frankly, it's hot air. We should be seeing 5% within the next couple of years to really have any sort of impact. And NATO allies' feet need to be held to the fire on this. It's not, as much as anything, it's about genuine defense output and capability.
What should we, whatever defense spending boost actually arrives, what should it be focused on relative to what's already being spent on?
Well, I think a really good example of how it needs to be spent is the recent British Defence Review, which I think makes a pretty good fist of meeting the needs and the challenges for the sort of war that we need to be able to deter if we are to live in peace.
And just finally, to round things off, one of the other things that President Zelensky said was that he felt some British components were reaching Russia and being used in their war effort. Is sanctions and economic sanctions something that makes a difference if it's enforced properly or not?
Absolutely, it does make a difference. And again, President Zelensky is absolutely on the money on this. And where there are British and other Western companies whose dual-use components are being used in Russian weaponry, that absolutely has to be hammered. I would also highlight the fact that the European Union, in the last 3 years, has paid Russia 3 times for oil and gas what it has spent on weaponry for Ukraine. So secondary sanctions against those who are still importing Russian oil and gas absolutely need to be applied. Yes, sanctions have a really important role to play, because at the end of the day, if and when Russia is to be acknowledged that it is defeated, part of that has got to come from economic and financial measures, and sanctions are therefore a critical component of any strategy to undermine the Russian economy.
General Sir Richard, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it as ever. Our Defence and Security Editor, Deborah